So we're I guess deep in the middle of the sugya of names, and I want to talk about actual bad names. And by bad names, I mean like people who have bad mazel, or something bad happened to them, or they had a very bad life, or they died young, or etc. This is like one of the most common, I guess, like questions that come up in regards to naming is, could you name after someone who had a subpar life? So I want to start like this. The truth is that in all of these type of things, like mazel-related things, where you're afraid that if you name after him, you're going to have bad mazel. So these really go into the basket of like kedis and ayin hara and mazalas and all these things. And there's a general posture that you see amongst the poskim. Really starts from the Gemara in Psachim, on Daf Kuf Tesmid Beis. After the Gemara brings the whole sugya of zugas, about eating pairs of things or doing things in pairs, the Gemara says this famous quote. It says, "Klal the milsa, kol the kapid b'hadei, le kapid b'hadei." Anybody who's makbid on this, meaning not makbid that means you're makbid on it. Makbid meaning you take it seriously, like you're scared of it. You know, it gets you going. Then kapid b'hadei, these mazalas, these shadim, these ruchas rois apply to you, and called le kapid b'hadei. Now, the Gemara in Psachim sounds like that you should be makbid on these things. It brings the whole Gemara about zugas, and only then at the end it like has this disclaimer like man the kapid le, man the le kapid le. But the Yerushalmi in Trumas in Perek Ches Halacha Gimel, over there the Yerushalmi says, you know, this is a vichtig. And the Rambam in different places, the Rambam when he talks about the sugya of Katlanis, the Rambam elsewhere seems to poo-poo these things that have to do with like that people are afraid of, or ruchas or etc. The Rambam doesn't seem to be very afraid of them. Other Rishonim, like Taisvis and Yuma, for example, says that this that the ilm is not nizr anymore in Mashkin Mogulim is because this type of ruach is not applicable to Elah Malchus where we live. So Taisvis says like another way of undoing it, meaning you see in the Rishonim and the Achronim as well, some Sefer has a tshuva about it, or Moshe has a tshuva about it. Many different places, the Rishonim and the Achronim seem to say that in these type of vinyanim, the kaptina le, the kaptina le. So it really depends how concerned you are. If you're not that concerned, then don't be too concerned about anything we say tonight. If you are concerned, okay, so then this is all very relevant. Now, the makar not to name after someone who had bad mazel or whatever is not from a Gemara. We went through most of the Gemaras that discuss, names, etc. There's an issa to name after, not an issa, there's a advice not to name after someone, maybe an issa, or Shem Risham Yerkav, not to name after a Rasha, but just not to name after someone who had bad mazel is not actually a Gemara. So it comes from the Sefer Chassidim. The Sefer Chassidim says as follows, Hashem Garim L'Teva Ilara, which is a concept that we said many times already. The name causes good and bad. There are names that anybody who's named after them does great. There are some people that I know. My shara always tells me. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky told him, "It's the mishpachas von jinge starbes, and it's the mishpachas von alter starbes." There are like families that live long, families that die young. Which again, you don't need to be a doctor to know that. But meaning, so the Sefer Chassidim says there are names like that also. There are names of good luck and there are names of bad luck. Names that have good lives and names that have bad life. And V'yesh Samel, the Sefer Chassidim says, just like a word to the wise. If you're going to name after someone who's a shvacha name, a name that has bad luck, you might be opening yourself up to bad luck. Now, this is a makar for this isser, for this advice you want to call it, not to name after someone who's a bad name. Now, is l'slamaisa aser? Is it not? Is it really aser? Is it like just it's a taiva? What's the long and short of this? So Rav Moshe has a fascinating tshuva, and I think most of tonight's shir is really just going to be discussing Rav Moshe's tshuva. Rav Moshe has a very interesting tshuva where he blazes like a whole entire sugya about this. Lakan or lakan, different place can be either way, and we'll see what he does with this. Now, I just want to share one Gemara before we start Rav Moshe. There is a Gemara in Moed Katan and Daf Chaf Heim Beis. It says as follows. It says like this. Rav Chanan Chasnei der Beinesiya, Rav Chanan, who was a son-in-law by the Nasi's house, Loi Kahavale Bani. He was not able to have children. So Bai Rachme, he davened. V'Havale, he had children. Hu Yema, that day, David that he was having a child. Nach Nafshe, he died. So Pasach Alehu Saftana, the hesped giver, the professional crier, called out on him. He said, Simcha letuga nehefcha sasam v'yagan idvchu be'simchasei. He said like how the terrible turn of emotions over here, like he was happy and then he became sad and the tzara. Now the Gemara ends off. The Gemara says, asiku lechanan al shmei, and they called the child Chanan al shmei. They named the child after his father. So here you have a case of a father who clearly, you would say, had bad mazel. Right? He got married and he did a rich shidduch. He married the Beinesiya. So that's one thing that went well for him. He married into the Nasi's family. But after that, it was downhill from there. He didn't have kids, and the minute he was finally able to have kids, he dies on the day of, which is like the ultimate patch. You know what I'm saying? That's the ultimate, goodbye present. And he dies. And they named this child Hanan after him. So it seems to be that there's not such a big concern with naming, after someone has bad mazel. Seemingly you have a Gemara over here where they called Hanan on the name of his father, even though the father had some sort of bad mazel. So now, keep that in mind in the background. Let's go through Rav Moshe's tshuva a little bit, and then maybe another Gemara or two. So Rav Moshe has a very interesting tshuva. The tshuva is to Rabbi Bressler from Scranton Yeshiva, the Yeshiva of Scranton, of Chaim Bressler. This was a personal shaila to him. Someone, I think his wife's sister died very young, and there was a question to name after her. This was a personal question. And he wrote to Rav Moshe, and he asked Rav Moshe that I think his in-laws were Haimish. He asked Rav Moshe, give me a good, explain it well. Like give me the whole inyan, so we can know what to do about it. And Rav Moshe writes a whole tshuva like this, and Rav Moshe does an interesting thing. He creates a machlekes between the Yam Shel Shlema and the Ramah about this shaila. Meaning, is this a real thing, or is this just like a Eitz Teva? He says, he points your attention to the Marshal. The Yam Shel Shlema in the 4th parak of Gittin has a whole kuntras on names, right? I don't know anyone who's learned Gittin in the 4th parak. So Shemus Begittin is a big sugya. The names, how to properly spell the names in the Gittin, which names have to be included, and etc. And the Poskim after that spent a lot of time on the names. The Beis Shmuel has a kuntras, the Marshal has a kuntras, many other Poskim have kuntrasim. So the Marshal in his kuntras has something interesting. He says the name Yeshayahu, Kach nimtza kasav Yeshayahu, b'chol sefer Melachim Yeshayahu. In all the svarim of Melachim and Yeshaya, where it's quoted things about Yeshayahu, it refers to his name as Yeshayahu with a vav at the end. You never met a person whose name is Yeshayahu. Kiyim Yeshaya l'chod. Anybody that you met, the name is Yeshaya. Avram Yeshaya. Yeshaya is a common Jewish name, and not Yeshayahu. Umatzasi b'divrei Yamim. Yeshaya ve'en Yeshayahu Hanavi. There is a person Yeshaya who's mentioned in Divrei Yamim. It's not Yeshayahu Hanavi. It's a different person. The Amina says the Marshal is Svar. The Marshal says I have a hunch. Amina mistamal lekaro acharav. Probably they didn't want to name after Yeshayahu Hanavi. Kireya Mazle. He had bad mazel. And instead, people wanted to name after Yeshaya Hanavi because he was like Yeshaya Hanavi, but you don't want to name after Yeshaya because he had bad mazel, because he got killed. So we don't name Yeshayahu, you name Yeshaya, you modify the name. Maybe people really intended to name for Yeshayahu, but you don't want to name the name of someone who had bad mazel, so you name it like a little Shina, Yeshina Ktas, and then it's all fixed.
Who was Yeshaya's bad mazel?
He got killed. He was murdered. So murder's murder, that's it's not a great ending. Now the nafkamina lahalacha is, and this is where you see if there's machlekes. Marshal says l'chein min hastam, when you're writing a get, if you're not sure if the guy's name is Yeshayahu or Yeshaya, you should write Yeshaya in the get. Don't write Yeshayahu. This is what the Marshal says. He says the name Yeshayahu. He also says it earlier on about the name Gedalia. Gedalio ben Achikam, who Tzem Gedalia is named for, also a murder victim. His name was Gedalyahu, with that same ending. Everyone in Klal Yisrael's name is Gedalyahu, is Gedalia. You never met a Gedalyahu. And the reason is for the same reason the Marshal says that this is a person who was murdered, even though he was a Gad Ladar. These were illustrious Gedalei Ladar. These are people that everybody wanted to name after, but since they were murdered and they had bad mazel, Klal Yisrael adopted like some sort of Shina in the name. Now, this is the Marshal's theory, and based on this theory, he's saying a tremendous nafkamina lahalacha. He's saying that when it comes to writing a get, where Shemus Begittin could passel it, where it's very important, you write Gedalia, not Gedalyahu. That's what the Marshal says. Now, the Beis Shmuel, in his country, Shemus Anashim, in Ois Yud, the Beis Shmuel says like this. He says, Kasav, Sheharama Shekasav Simkov Chavtes, Sif Chavav, Tzarch Bistama Lichtav Gedalyo, and Loisha Omer Bevadish Shmei Gedalia. The Marsha, the Ramah in Even Ezra and Kuf Chavtes, he writes about the name Gedalyo, and he says, Bistama, if you don't know what it is, if it's Gedalyo or Gedalyo, the accurate name, the authentic name is Gedalyo, write Gedalyo in the get. That's what the Ramah says. So the Beis Shmuel is aiming on this, and the Beis Shmuel says, it seems like there's a machlekes, the Marshal and the Ramah, if we're worried about bad luck. Do we say the name is really Gedalyo, Yeshayahu, and that's really the name, and when you're not sure, you write that in a get because that's the stamius? Or do we say, no, nobody gives that name, that's a bad name. Nobody would give that name, that's a bad luck name. It must be the name is Yeshaya and Gedalia. So
it's not about bad luck.
Bad mazel.
No,
yeah.
In a get, at that point.
In a get is just reflective.
No, it's just about it's about the authentic name.
In a get is just reflective of what the posture of Klal Yisrael is. It's a way to reverse engineer what people are doing. That's what it is. It's proving to you what people are
Or
doing.
maybe if you're not sure what his name is, you go with the authentic name.
No, that doesn't work
Nothing
again.
to
We're
do
trying to
with
figure out what this person's name is. There's no what this person's name is. This is a way to reverse engineer what Klal Yisrael's posture towards this name is. Is it Gedalia or Gedalia? Now, this is written 500 years ago. Ramesh should bring it for today's day and age. Yeah.
But I don't understand. Anyone that's named Gedalia or Shai is being named after someone whose name is already Gedalia or Shai.
It all comes from there, though. The first Gedalia and the first Yeshaya were those.
Right,
So.
but his name he's being named after.
No, that's true. I'm not worried about that right now. Yeah. So he says, Alma the Sever Harama the Ein Lahakbid al Zed Likely Yam Shlema. You see, the Ramah was not makbid on this, not like the Yam Shlema. He says, Ach Ula Yeshlemer the Le Palag Ramah B'Shem Navi v'Tzadik Meforsim. Maybe the Ramah wasn't worried about bad mazel when it's a Navi and a Tzadik Meforsim. Even though, yeah, they had a sad ending. They got killed. Yeshaya and Gedalia, both Yeshayo and Gedalia both got killed. But these are, Gedolei HaChachamim Nevim v'Tzadikim. So even if they had a shtickle bad mazel, there's like it's a counterbalance. There's enough good mazel to go with the bad mazel, and we're not so concerned about it. Then Ramesh brings a whole different thing, and he brings that the Chassam Sofer argues on him, and the Chassam Sofer Taka in a tshuva in Even Ezer and Chelik Beis in tshuva Chafei, I think. Over there, the Chassam Sofer writes as follows. 1 second. I can't find the piece now. But over there, the Chassam Sofer says that the Ramah is not really arguing. The Ramah does not argue on this din from the Marshal, and it's only in particular these names that the Ramah holds are different, and he's not really arguing. Now, Memela Ramesh says that it comes out, it's Machlekes the Marshal, in his opinion, it's Machlekes the Marshal and the Ramah, and therefore he says, according to the Marshal, there's a Kpeda, and according to the Ramah, there's not a Kpeda. Aval ayim b'Chassam Sofer b'Even Ezer chal chelik beis m'chavei shesever shegam Ramah moed l'Marshal shekek Kpeda. Really, the Chassam Sofer says that the Ramah is maskim too. V'shem Gedalia v'chein shem Yeshayahu shani shematzinu b'divrei Yam mimachlakas aleviyim shesyachsu al duchen Gedalia hasheni sheyo hashmini ayin sham nimtzil du shekuli yam yesh Kpeda. According to the Chassam Sofer, Rav Moshe says everybody holds as a Kpeda. Side the Marshal, side the Ramah, everybody's maskim that there's a Kpeda to name a name that's associated with bad mazel. And just these particular names, Yeshayahu and Gedalia, since there are other people in Divrei Yam with the same names who are also important people, and you could be chayshish, or you could assume that the person was named after those people, so only in this case we're not chayshish, but in general we're chayshish. Now, that's what Moshe says. And Memela Moshe says, Taka, that you should be cautious about this, and someone who had bad mazel, died young, or whatever, died without children, or died young, or something like that, there's reason to be cautious and not to give the name after. That's what Moshe says. Now, but Moshe goes into like an interesting side tangent. He says as follows. Very interesting question. Moshe says that what's the age? Where's the cutoff point where you say it's bad mazel? Meaning, the guy was murdered. I hear that's bad mazel at any age. That's a pretty tragic end at any age. The guy's he's walking down the street, he's hit by a bus. It's pretty tragic. You don't want to be involved in that. But if a guy dies in his bed, he dies normal on his bed, regular. Where's the age where you say that's bad mazel? So Moshe says that Shmuel HaNavi and Shlomo HaMelech both were only 52 years old when they were nifter. And V'regilim Tuva B'Yosel, the Krei B'Shmam Shmuel B'Shlomo. Everybody gives those names. V'Chizkiyahu HaMelech Heirak Nun Dalet Shana. Chizkiyahu was lived 52 years. V'Kairin B'Shmai, and everybody calls after his name. Meaning these are all, again, of course, everyone today is named, but these are all popular names because these were legends in Klal Yisrael. These were icons in Klal Yisrael, so these became popular names. He says these Shmuel, Shlomo, and Chizkiyahu are all people who died in their early 50s, and Klal Yisrael adopted these names, wholeheartedly, he says. So he says something interesting. He says, Imkein efshir shalei nechshav re'eh mazlei klal b'meis amitasai, afshah haya oid tzar mizeh, b'moisei, da'ashanim shenikvitzul adam ulei einin klala. You get the amount of years that you get. If a person had a successful life, like Shlomo, like Shmuel, like Chizkiyahu, he had a successful life, he did well, they made an impact, they did very well for themselves, they died at 52 years old. Okay, that was the amount of years that Hashem designated for them. It's not a klala to die young if it was a good life. There was no, Hashem didn't see a tzarech in this neshama being in this world for longer than that.
So how do you define that? It's like getting sick.
Very vague. That's why this is.
Maybe they died from cancer and they never knew that.
This is such an interesting, 100%. This is such an interesting question. He says, Then Ramesh unless the pasuk Lahedi tells you that somebody died because of an avera, you don't have to worry about it. This is interesting. He says, people who die childless, a guy dies without kids, that's mistama, that's really bad luck. He says, in this story that your sister-in-law died when she was 28 years old, in Mesa b'leibanim vadi yesh lahak b'shel the krei habas ano the leil shma. What do you say?
Someone died for an aver.
Same medallion? It's hard for us to say.
So
No, murder. Ramesh seems to believe that murder, yeah, if someone's killed is already Reya Mazda automatically. If the person has children, it's a suffix if it's a kpeda or not. There's Ramesh says, if your wife is nervous about doing it, don't ignore her position of this because she's coming from somewhere. This is what he writes. It's a very interesting tshuva. But Ramosha ends off with this eitzah. He says, but if you mishana the name a little bit, you make a small change, like Ishayo to Yeshaya, or Chizkiyo to Chizkiya, or Gedayo to Gedalia, these which are relatively minor changes to the name, that's good enough to clean up the name, and then you don't have to worry. And he brings a raya from Chasam Sofer, that the Chasam Sofer says, the name Akiva, which most people are naming because of the Tana of Akiva, that's the original Akiva person, and a lot of people spell it Akiva, Ayin Kuf Yud Vez Hey, not like a Akiva used to spell it Ayin Kuf Yud Vez Aleph. People spell it that way. He says even that the Chasam Sofer held was enough of a shinoi to change it that it's not bad mazel. Just spelling it like one word, one letter off was enough. So yeah. No, he's bringing. Ramesh is just saying that a little shinoi is enough. A little bit of a change is enough. So this is a very Yisraelistic tshuva. Ramesh sets it up as a machlekes between, according to the Beis Shmuel, there's a machlekes between the Marshal and the Ramah. According to the Chasam Sofer, there's no machlekes. Beini, there's a serious makam to be chayshish that if someone died under tragic or early or childless circumstances, there's a reason to be chayshish that he has bad mazel, and to not give that name is a valid concern. But as long as you make a small shinoi, that should be enough to fix it, is what Ramesh says. Now, the question is there any difference in this regard when it's a family name? Like, these are all names of Kilu Gedali Yisrael, right? These are famous people. Akiva, Chizkiyo, or Akiva was murdered, right? Or Gamliel was murdered, or Akiva was murdered. There's different examples. Chizkiyo, Yeshayo, Gedayo, all different people. But these are famous people. What about a personal, like a family name? Where a person wants to name after a father or a grandfather, someone who died young or died under tragic circumstances. Is there like a difference to that? So, there's something interesting as follows. There's first of all, I just want to say one thing. The Stipler, rather, the Stipler writes, he has a letter in Chelik Beis in Kraina Degrus. He writes as follows: B'dvar Shem al Misha Niftar, someone who died, young, lo yelena b'tziruse when he was young. Ragal ani liyayetz. I give advice. He says, L'mashal k'shashem wa Avram. Let's say you're naming Avram. Sha'av b'shas kriyas Hashem yischaven shem chas v'shalom lemutzlach she'yinikra al shem adam plani yeheshma Avram al shem Avram Avinu al shem Aravid. Which I think is addressing what you're saying. That today when we name, we're really naming for the local relative, right? You're naming for the local relative. It's a grandfather, great-grandfather, whatever, a rebbe, whatever it is. The Stipler used to tell people, when you're naming a name and you're worried that there's something, so think of another famous person or two that had that name, and just say, like, it should be for all these people. It should be for all these people. I happen to know my father, when he named me, I believe he told me, I'm named for my great-grandfather. His name was Yoel. But he said he had in mind the Bach and Yoel Hanavi. The Yoel Hanavi is probably the first Yoel, again, like following this chain all the way back. The Bach's a famous Yoel, which is very similar to the disciples' advice. Is Avram Avinu and Avram the Ravid. The original, a famous one, and the one you want. And like that, Beini, you're covering your bases. That's what the disciple says is the Eitzah. A little bit of everything. It's interesting. He even uses the words. I don't know. Yeah, this is what he says. But then he adds off, for sure, if you add another name, that's even better. And now adding another name, two names, is a whole other sugya maybe we'll get to. But that's what the Stipler writes about this. Now, circling back to the question that we were talking about, is there a difference when it's a family member, when it's a father, etc., whatever, something like that? So this is Gemara in Yuvamis. It says like this. The Gemara in Yuvamis in Daf Chav Daled Amud Aleph has an interesting discussion. It says, Tanar Rabbanan, V'haya HaBachar, the pasuk that says Yibum goes as follows. It says, V'haya HaBachar Asher Teled, Yakum Hashem Achav HaMeis, V'liyim Chashmai B'Yisrael. The Bachar that will be born to the Yibum union, right? A brother dies and his brother marries his wife. So the Bachar that will be born to that union, Yakum Hashem Achav HaMeis, should be raised on the name of his dead brother, and V'liyim Chashmai B'Yisrael. And the dead brother's name won't be erased from Klal Yisrael. Now the Gemara dashes from this a bunch of things. It says, "V'haya b'char mikancha mitzvah b'gadol, asher teled prat la'ilanish, yakum al shemachav lenachla, that you yarshin." Frek the Gemara lenachla ta'imer, ayene el l'shem. Maybe it means literally that you give the name Yosef Karinasi Yosef, Yochanan Karinasi Yochanan. So the Gemara says, "No, nemar kan yakum al shemachav and nemar lahalan al shemachayse." It doesn't mean that. To which the Gemara ends up saying over here, it brings a memory. Rava says, even though normally ein mikri yotzim midei pshutai, Over here, Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta. Amar Rava Afagav the B'chal Torah Kula in Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta. We never take a pasuk out of its simple literal meaning. Hacha Asig Zer Shava Apiktim Mipashti Legamri. Over here, the Gzer Shava comes and it takes the pasuk completely out of context and puts it in a whole different context. Now, the Gemara over here started with the Havmina, that maybe this pasuk means that you should name the baby that's born after the brother who died, after his father who's dead. Now, let's math the math, okay? Back in the day, the average person probably got married, let's say low teens, mid-teens, let's say, right? The life expectancy was like 30. So if a guy died without kids, and it's no kids, so this is his beginning of his marriage probably, so let's assume he's in his upper teens. So you're talking about a father who died in his upper teens without children. That's a pretty solid combination of bad luck, right? And we don't know how he died, under what circumstance he died, but your average Yibum case, meaning is going to be a couple of childbearing age, which is going to be a youngish couple, that dies without children, which means a relatively young man. Now, I'm not saying that there can't be any other variables, but your average, your run-of-the-mill case, call it, 70, 80% of your cases of Yibum, is a pretty tragic story, right? Anytime you can have a Yibum case, it's a pretty tragic story. And the Gemara jumps right in and says the Havmina is that Yaakam al Shem Achav Ames, you should name the baby for the dead brother, for his father who died. Now, the Gemara ends up saying, in this case, Rava says, Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta, and that's not what the Mikra means, and we dash in something different. But the Gemara doesn't seem to have a problem with naming the kid after his dead father who had bad mazel. The Gemara seems to... What do you say?
Why does the Gemara say not to do
because of Gzer Shava, we have a different limit in the passing. And Ad Kadei Kach, the Gemara doesn't seem like it has a problem. Rashi in Chumash, in Bereshis, Rashi says that, where's Rashi? I forgot exactly where it is, but Rashi says, in Rashi on the pasuk says that, I want to read it for you. Rashi says that the minig was, Rashi says we give the name, Yaakam al Shem Achav, that Kairin to the son who's born, I'll shame the father. Yochanan, Yosef, we give the name. The Ramban of Anort says, what do you mean? The Gemara said that that's not the Maskana. Why are you saying that? That's not Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta. That's not what it means. Well, why say that? But Rashi does say that Al Torah, and the Re'im, the Rabbi Yoel Mizrachi says that Rashi just means Kaidim Matan Torah, that was the minig. It doesn't mean Bizman. That's what the Re'im says. But the Ramosha Chagiz, in his Sefer Eila Divrei HaMitzvahs, he brings something interesting, and I want to read it for you. He says like this. He says, Im Tachkar, if you'll do research, he says, you look around, you do some research. Im Tachkar, Timtze Gadlus Tereseinu HaKadosh, you'll find the greatness of our Torah. Shafilu b'makom zeh ein Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta. Even in this case, where the Gemara says, where Rava says Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta, really ein Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta. V'layatzu dvarei levatala hepach hapshat. And the words are not levatala keneged the pshat. U'minig Yisrael Torah, the minig of Klal Yisrael's Torah, v'simei necha b'hashgacha pratis. Pay attention to the hashgacha pratis that exists. Shemizgalgulu hadvarim begilgul amiti anoid l'mukvam. Find the Klal Yisrael always does the right thing. Says sha'yivama hazeh. Ben like Timtze Echad Mekayim Mitzvah Shirkwer as Shem Haben Anoilad Al Shem Av V'Kol Shegem B'Shem Acher El Rak B'Shem Achav Hames. He says if you'll look around and you'll do research about cases of Yibum, you'll see nobody gives a different name. Everybody who does a case of Yibum, they give the name after the brother who died. That's the common practice. Now, Yibum is not a common practice anymore. Almost nobody does Yibum anymore. Sfardim, Rebbe Vadi Yosef held strongly Sfardim should still be doing Yibum, which is the real Sfardic minig, but he lost that fight. Primarily, I think the last Yibum in Israel, as far as I know, was like in the 70s. I could be wrong, but maybe there's bootleg Yibum. Maybe there's like a bootleg Yibum system. I don't know. But in the Rabbanut in Israel, Yibum is off the table already. It was like a deal they made in the 1950s. Ravadi protested it for a few more decades, and then eventually I think like it fell into disuse. But the Ram Chagiz, who's writing from hundreds of years ago, in the 1700s, 1700s, is writing that Pok Chazi, you'll see that this is what everybody does. And he says, Einam Nevi'im, B'nei Nevi'im Heim, and Klal Yisrael understood that Ein Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta. That even though the Gemara says, Rava says, Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta, but L'maisa Ein Mikra Yitzim Midei Pshuta, and everybody names the name. So the Chayr over here, you have some sort of raya, that when it's familial, when you're naming after a father, or maybe even a grandfather, whatever, then this idea of bad mazel and stuff doesn't seem to exist. Now, I don't know if anyone says this lahadiyah, but I saw a quote of B'Shem Rosh Zalman. He says that the minig is Shulay l'krei Shem Achrei Adam Shemeis Begil Tzar. The Torah says there's a mitzvah of kibbud of aim, so you should have long life. Shem Zalman says it's like minei obey. The Torah says so naming after a father is the ultimate kibbud of aim. So this kibbud of aim is not going to cause the person to have bad mazel. So some of this fakir, this will give him good mazel. It will give him arichas yom. So Shem Zalman is not talking about a Yibum case; he's talking about any case. Yeah. So he's saying that counterbalances that, just like we saw, let's say that svara that Rav Moshe brought, that by like really the Ramah was saying it, the Bishmol was saying it, like by a tzaddik gadol, like a navi, a tzaddik gadol, and even though if he has bad mouths, he was killed, but like it balances out. So the Rosh Hashanah seems to be saying like the kabbalah, the schos of Arichas Yom for kabbalah avicha balances out like the Re'eh Mazle of the name. Now,
That star would apply even to like a great grandfather.
it's hard to know where you draw the line. If you have live parents and grandparents who care about you naming for the great grandparents, right? You could probably stretch the interpretation of Kibbutz Re'im a little further. Putting on Eman the Kapad like Abdin and Lei, and putting on the fact that the Gemara seems to say it as a Pashtus by Yibum, together with the Kibbutz, like you could, I'm saying, it depends how concerned you are. It really depends how concerned you are. But I can see that being stretched. Now, there is rather an interesting maybe carve out also. This is not really Sunagaya to us, but Machna Chaim has a carve out for people who are killed by Kiddush Hashem. Meaning, if someone's killed by Kiddush Hashem, even though they could be brutally murdered, stabbed on the side of the road somewhere, but if they were killed by Kiddush Hashem, he says, Heyois, he says, interesting story. He says, Masha Re'inu, Sherav Akiva, Rav Gamliel, Shayim Asar, Rav Malchus, Fafa Bikir, and Nikru B'Shmam. Those are popular names. I think Gamliel has fallen out of popularity a little bit, but Akiva's, going strong. These are names that were popular in Klal Yisrael, even though they're from the Asar, Rav Malchus, Fafa Bikir, and Nikru B'Shmam, V'chein Gedalia V'Shayo, Hasam Hainu Time Akivin Shenereg al Kiddush Hashem, Hashem Mevarchem Bracha al Kiddush Shem Shemayim, V'gam Beguf HaHariga Avdu Es Hashem, Kikiyim HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Makrevi HaKadosh, Shebacha B'Machshav, V'Mkein L'Nikru Re'eh Mazle. Being used as an instrument of Kveit Shemayim, the Hainu like being Mekadosh Shem Shemayim in this way, is itself some sort of good luck, so to speak, and therefore it's not Re'eh Mazle. This is Machna Chaim says. So it's like an interesting carve out to the.
Still change the name a little bit.
Yeah, we still change it a little bit, exactly. That's like a interesting carve out to the thing. Okay, in any case, that's the sugya of Kilu bad names, actual real bad names, names that are associated with bad mazel. Now, we did discuss today that there's some eitzes for this, is two names or changing the names, and there's many shalos about changing the name. Let's say the word has a certain meaning, so you give a name that has the same meaning but a different word. Like, does that work? Or could you switch genders? Like, take a name that's similar from one gender to another gender. Could you do two names? These are more shalos. Possibly, perhaps, we'll continue this. We'll see. To be continued, maybe.
What about a name you have to
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.